Scripture this morning will be from 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 6 through 9. This is the New English translation. My point is this: the person who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and the person who sows generously will also reap generously. Each one of you should give just as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, because God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace overflow to you, so that because you have enough of everything in every way at all times, you will overflow in every good work. Just as it is written, He has scattered widely, He has given to the poor, His righteousness remains forever.
Again, thank you for the reading. Glad that you're here. God's blessed us with another great day to come together. We're about to wind up the series that we started a few months ago. I hope, if anything, you've realized that God and worship go together, and that God expects proper worship. Not only does he expect worship, but he expects proper worship. Where, how, when, what do we do? Who is it that we're worshiping? He wants us to understand all those things, and he puts a great judgment, I believe, on that. We don't see that today, and we think we can worship God in any way we want to. We can have bands up here. We can have celebrity stars come. We can have plays. We can do all these kind of things. But biblically, those aren't proper. And so I hope at least we've learned that from the very beginning. God has expected man to worship him as he has commanded. And in John 4, we find that Jesus said we are to worship him now in spirit and in truth. And so I want to talk about 2 Corinthians 9. We looked at 2 Corinthians 8 last week. And you remember he's encouraging the Corinthians here because he's talking about Macedonia. Now, Corinth and Athens, they're in Achaia. And they're together, the Roman provinces, Macedonia and then Achaia. And he tells about the Macedonians being poor. We talked about that. And he talked about them giving, though, joyfully and abundance, persistently. He said, they're begging me to take it. And they're giving that plus, whatever they had plus. And it's interesting in 8, he said, I'm not speaking this in 8:8. I'm not speaking this as a command, but I want you to do this from the heart to show your earnestness and your love for God and for your mankind, to be sincere in doing it. And then we didn't look at the last part of 8, but he's talking about the genuineness in sending Titus and the couple there before him to help make sure that the money is prepared for when Paul comes. And when you look at 9, as I mentioned last week, 8 is Macedonia encouraging the Corinthians, and 9 is the Corinthians encouraging the Macedonians. We are to encourage one another. As sister congregations, we should be able to encourage one another in whatever needs that we have. And so there was a famine, probably the one that Agabus was talking about, but there were some needs down there in Jerusalem and Judea. And we read about that in the first letter of Corinthians, in 1 Corinthians 16:1. He says, lay by in store, there'll be no gatherings when I come. And so they we're ready to do that and excited about doing that, as I mentioned last week. But as we read, somewhere down the line, that excitement began to diminish and decrease. And so Paul says, I'm coming, but I'm going to send some others before me to make sure that things are prepared and things are ready when I come. I may have some Macedonians come with me, and I don't want to be embarrassed when I come and they're not ready to be picked up. And I don't want the Macedonians to be distressed about it. And I don't want God to not be glorified in it. And I don't want the church of Corinth to be an embarrassment. That's what he says. How many churches do you think would be offended by some of the letters that Paul wrote? Well, they weren't offended. We don't need to get offended when brothers and sisters talk the truth. And so, what was read by Clay, thanks for the reading. We mentioned this last week, and I want to continue on and then say a few things. But he says, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And then the opposite is true. Bountifully will reap bountifully. I mentioned that last week. Now, some of you have gardens. I know Jim usually has a garden, and Nick has a garden, and Phil has a garden, and maybe some of you, others of you do. I'm not here to remember who does, who doesn't. But you plant. If you plant one tomato plant, you're going to have just a few tomatoes. If you plant a row, however long that row is, you will have a bountiful bunch of tomatoes. And that's what happens every year. People bring in from their gardens or wherever tomatoes or okra or peppers or whatever it is, because they've planted many. They didn't just plant one plant. And if they just planted one plant, they probably wouldn't even have enough maybe for their own, but they plant bountifully. And so when Lance would go out and plant for the cows, he wouldn't just take half-acre of ground, and that wouldn't be enough to even start for all the cows he's got. So you plant acres and acres so you'll have an abundance to feed the cows. That's what he's talking about here. But what he's talking about here too is that God allows you to have things so that you can give things. He doesn't want you to sow sparingly. He wants you to sow bountifully. And the more you sow, the more God sees to it that you have. And the more you have, the more that you can give. Now, this is not, and I kind of mentioned this last week briefly, but this is not the televangelists that we see on TV or those who talk about giving all the time. This is not the seed faith type of thing that you read about or hear about on articles and on TV and on radio. He's not saying here, if you give $100, guess what? God's going to give you tenfold. You'll get 1,000 back. And then, boy, you can eat, drink, and be merry. And then when you give 200 of that 1,000 back, then you'll get 2,000. And it goes on and on. That's not what he's talking about. That's what they talk about. But God's saying, you sow 100, you'll bountifully get so that you can give back. Totally different than what is being preached by this false doctrine. That's not what he means at all. He's not talking about so you get to self, but that you will be able to give to others. We talked about the Macedonian church. We talked about the widow with the 2 mites. They gave sacrificially. Like the widow and the 2 mites at the treasury. There were the rich giving what they had extra. It didn't hurt them any. And then God sees the widow with the 2 mites, and he uses that as a lesson as he says, come here, disciples. I want to talk to you. That's what he's saying here. And then he says, each one, verse 7, must do just as he purposed in his heart. Notice what it says. All of the giving that is talked about in the New Testament church is free will giving. God has not set forth to say, Nick, you're to give $10,000 this year. Chuck, you're to give $10,000 this year. Ernie, you're to give $40,000 this year. Bo, you're to give $50,000. He doesn't do that. Free will giving negates fundraising. People have asked me, what do I think about having a yard sale here in our parking lot? Well, for no matter what that purpose is, I don't think it's good. I don't think people should get the wrong impression by us having something visible that God has not approved. Now, if you want to have a yard sale in your house because your child is going on a mission trip, I don't see anything wrong with that. If you want to have a yard sale and you give all of it to church, that's your business. That's a free will gift. But there's no bake sales. There's no yard sales. There's none of this passing out drawing things. There's nothing. You name whatever you want to. If it's not a free will offering, that is yours. Then that's not acceptable New Testament teaching or biblical giving. And we should never do anything that gives the wrong impression to the church, whether we're trying to do right or not, because it's improper. And so he says we must give free will from the heart. What does that mean? Well, he says not grudgingly or under compulsion. What does that mean? Not grudgingly or under compulsion. For God loves a cheerful giver. What does that mean? Let's talk about that for a minute. I taught the teenage class for many years, not just here. And basically, all I taught in the high school class was Acts. Took 3 years to get through it. You can probably ask Kristen. I think she went away for a little bit and came back. We're still in Acts. It's about all I taught. But in teaching Acts, you had to go through Ephesians and Romans also. And I don't mean each chapter or anything, but there's always, it just seems for me. And so in those 3 years, we talked a lot about the organization of the church, how it got started, why it's here, what Christ did, those kind of things. And so if you started in the 10th grade, guess what? In the 12th grade, we were done and we were starting over. But in that time, I asked a lot of questions. And usually in high school, the kids were working or at least were getting something from their parents for doing certain things, maybe mowing the yard, taking out the trash, painting the house, whatever. And so I asked them, how much of that do you give back to the church? Or do you give any to the church? Or have you thought about it or what? And they almost 100% of every class that I ever taught said, no, we're not giving anything to the church. I said, you don't give anything to church? No. Well, when your children are young, we try to do this with ours, but if you give them an allowance, no matter what age they are, if they understand what they're supposed to do and they understand that you'll give them $1 if they clean up the room or 50 cents if they take out the trash, whatever it is, do you teach your children at that time? Some of that should go to God. And so if you give your child $1, and I'm not saying how much they should give, do you give it to them in change and let them decide, or ever talk to them about giving some of that back to God? How much would they give? Do you explain to them, if you give them $1 and then you give them 25 cents and then you give them a nickel and then you give them a dime and then you give them a penny, if you were to give them all that, lay it out on a Sunday morning and say, what would you, this is all of yours, what of this would you give to God this morning? What would they pick anything out, or what would they pick out? Would they pick out the penny? Would they pick out the $1? Would they pick out the quarter, the nickel? What would they pick out? We teach them the value of money. We should very early. But God expects us to be stewards of our money. You see, what we don't give in the plate is still God's. Now, to help you understand, I believe what 7 and 8 is telling us, let's read 8, and God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that always having all sufficient in everything, you may have an abundance for every good deed. Now, I brought up the kids because I want to talk to you adults about, let's just say you make $1,000 a month. You change jobs and you make $2,000 a month, so you have a new budget. Where is God in that budget? I just want you to think about it. Where do you put God in that budget? Some come to church. I'm not talking about anybody specifically at all. I'm not even talking about any of us. I don't know what you do, but I don't some over the years. They come to church, and when the time to give is, they're doing this. What is that? That means they have not prepared. They're going to give whatever they have, if they have anything, in their billfold, unless it's too much they think to give. That's giving grudgingly. That's not giving self. Dave Ramsey, some of you didn't go through that. He had the answer. When you put God first, so you don't have to worry about it, is you take out what you willingly want to give to God. And if you get $1,000 raise, you can say, I want to give $100 to God a week or whatever. You put that aside. It is no longer in your budget. It is no longer for restaurants. It's no longer for movies. It's no longer for gas. It's no longer for anything. Even though the rest of that money's God, you've already set it aside And that's what he's talking about. You don't have to worry about it every week. You don't have to worry about it every month. It's not even in your budget because God has been taken care of. Then what you have left goes into a budget. And if you can't afford to eat out every week, that's just the way it is. Here, it's over and above. What he's talking about here in 1 Corinthians 16, and what he's talking about in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, he's talking about a special collection for the saints that are hurting in Judea. And he says, now, dig deep and give. And don't worry, because God will take care of you. If you want to sow and reap, you do it either sparingly or you do it bountifully. And God will make sure you're taken care of. Not necessarily $100 to 1,000 or $100 to 100 to 200. That's not what he's talking about. It's not just money. But he meets our needs. We're getting ready to give to EEM in a month. Has anybody given any thought if they laid by in store for this special collection? That's the same thing he's talking about here. There's a need in the Ukraine, and we're talking about children. We're talking about schools that are able to get the Bible and hear the gospel of Christ. And when we give, no matter what you give, when the church sends that money to EEM collectively, that means we've had a part in spreading the gospel in Ukraine. We can't be there, but we can make sure that there are Bibles the children can read. They can be there. That's our part. And so when we are a cheerful giver, the first thing we do is we lay aside. And I want us to understand, why does he say sow sparingly and reap sparingly and bountifully, because he has not set a 10% on us. There is not a tithe that's directed to any Christian in the New Testament church, period. So you can give what you want to. And what he says here is your heart is the one that tells you what to give. Macedonia, they gave plus. Corinth, they said they would give, but they hadn't even set it aside yet. And Paul says, look, Titus and some others I'm sending to you. They're coming ahead of me. Me and some Macedonians and others are going to be there. Don't embarrass us and don't embarrass God. You said you'd do it, and I know you want to do it, but you haven't done it. But don't embarrass God. When we give, we feel good, don't we? I don't think there's any person alive that gives cheerfully to something. If you know a family, say next door, and let's just say that child needs some help, and so they've got to go to one of the special clinics, whether it's in Texas or up north or whatever. And they need some travel money and some money, and you give to that, and that child gets the care that that child needs, you feel great. Verse 10 says, now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. That's what he's talking about. Our liberality, he talks about in 11, you'll be enriched in everything for all liberality which through us is producing thanksgiving to God. Notice what it says. We abound in so many things, not just materially. God loves a free will, cheerful giver. And it doesn't matter how much money's in the treasury of the church. I've talked to a lot of people over the years saying, well, they got money in the savings. They don't need my money. I'm not going to give anything until they need it. That's not what it says. You don't base your giving on anybody else. You don't base your giving on what the church has. You base your giving on your love of God and the sincerity of your heart. That's what you base your giving on. And God doesn't tell you what that is. He leaves that up to you and me. The other thing is, when you set an amount aside, you don't have to worry when it comes Sunday. You don't have to worry if you miss a Sunday. Some don't understand that the lights still have to be paid. The heat and air still has to be paid. The missions that we sponsor still has to be paid. And it's strictly up to you. God doesn't want you to give if you don't want to. But if they miss 6 weeks, they don't give anything for 6 weeks. And again, I'm not talking about anybody particularly here or in any congregation right now. I'm just talking in general. When you're gone from your house to 6 weeks, I bet you still get an electric bill. I'd bet that. I bet you still get a wireless cellular bill or a phone bill. Probably still get an internet bill now. Probably still get a garbage bill. Probably still have to make your mortgage payment. Probably insurance still has to be paid. The church is no different. It's not to be based on that. But when you give to God and you've already set apart, you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about it. And that's what God says here. You give and he'll supply. And when he supplies, guess what? You'll have more to give. He's not just talking about the church. He's talking about those in need too. But I'm talking about the church and God. We need to teach our children very young, when they get an allowance, what that dollar means. You need to break it up for them. You need to ask them. If they don't want to give to God, you don't have to bust them in the chops. Teach them. We need to do that as our kids get into the 8th and 9th grade and start to work. Or mows the yards for our neighbor and he or she gets money. We need to teach him the value of money. But have you thought about setting aside that which is God's? Because he's giving you the health and the need. We need to teach our children. Like I said, we're about to wind it down, and I don't think most people in here, or at least half people in here, have never heard me talk about giving. At least in a series of lessons like I have. I think the church here is blessed. When I first came here, When I first came here, 30 years ago, they had a preacher that left, and he had a car that the church was furnishing, but they couldn't pay him very much. And we sold the car, for $1,300. And so there was somebody we knew that was trying to go to the preacher school. And it was mentioned in the meeting that we had one that was going to preacher school. Is there anything that we could do to help? Well, the church here didn't have much money at that time. I mean, it was struggling from week to week to week to week, like a lot of churches do. It was a small, still young congregation. And I'll tell you who said it, because I'll never forget it. Chuck said, we just sold a car for $1,300. Why don't we just give him all of it? I honestly almost fell over in my chair. And everybody agreed to it. And we didn't have money in the bank. And Chuck said, well, if we can't believe and have the faith that God will still take care of us, then we shouldn't have the money anyway. Something to that effect. It's not quote unquote, but it's close. We gave the whole $1,300. I'll never forget it. It's the first year I was here. Well, it was probably within 6 months that I was here, when I was preaching all the time. And there's been some ups and downs. But look what we got. Look what we got today. I believe that $1,300 was the greatest investment we ever made. I've always appreciated Chuck saying that. Never forget it, never will. And I'm not here to embarrass him or praise him or anything for that. That's not my purpose. But everybody agreed. We have a facility here that we need to understand that we're blessed with. Not only blessed with, but everything that the church here has is paid for. Everything. There's nothing that you see that's not paid for. There's not a book. There's not an eraser. There's not a paper towel. There's nothing. We have monthly bills. We have missions. We have benevolence. We have maintenance. We have a lot of things that has to be paid for. But those are met thanks to the free will offerings of this congregation. But I've always thought that as long as we were willing to give, you see, every time that we have gained contribution, and those that's been in the business meetings and kept up know this is true. We have never, ever stopped a mission, but we've added a mission. We give to 9 or 10. 3 or 4, we give over $100. If you want to know, you can ask. Most men know what they are. But as we've increased, we've never decreased in our giving to missions, and our giving to benevolence, and our giving to EEM. And I think God has blessed this congregation because of that. There's not many congregations, other than if they're 60, 70 years old, that can say everything is paid for. We like the principle that If you have a big loan, then you're indebted. We're not indebted to anybody but God and Christ. And that's what he says in the last verse of 2 Corinthians 9. Thanks be to God for this undescribable, in other words, human terms cannot. There are no words that can reflect or that we can give for the Son of God, for Christ, for the gift. John 3:16, 2 Corinthians 8 also talks about Christ who was rich became poor. We talked about that last week. So that you and I may be rich. Someday, hopefully, all of us can, in a manner of speaking, gather hands and enter the gates around the throne of God. If you're not ready for that day, won't you come as we stand and sing?